You're listening to the Travis Makes Money podcast. Hey, what's going on, money makers? Welcome back to the Travis Makes Money podcast, where it's our mission to help you make more money this year. Today, we're going to be talking about Congress and starting a podcast in that space with my good friend, Jen Briney. She's the host of the Congressional Dish podcast, which is a show focused on examining the actions of the U.S. Congress. And it now generates over $200,000 a year through sponsors and Patreon and different creator monetization opportunities like that. So I'm stoked to get in this conversation with Jen. But before we do, if you're listening and you wonder how I go about building the relationships with the amazing people that I have on this show and on my other show, Travis Makes Friends, the podcast has been the hack. The podcast is the tool of choice. A good show can explode your network, grow your personal brand, pay you sponsorship dollars to do those things. And it's been probably the best decision I've ever made professionally. So if you're curious if a podcast can do some of these things for you, and you're already running a successful business, head over to travischappell.com/coaching. There's a quick application there. We could jump on a call, see if it might be a good fit to work together to get your show out into the world or to improve your existing show. travischappell.com/coaching. Jen Briney, what's up? Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. It's always a good time hanging out with you, Jen. You know, we've hung out in different places at this point, all over the world. I was going to say all over the country.
Yeah.
But yeah, you came over and surprised me on a birthday trip, my 30th in Cancun, Playa del Carmen area.
I think so. Yeah. Somewhere in Mexico. That much I know for sure.
It was international. Yeah.
That was one of the best YOLO decisions I've ever made in my life. Crash your birthday party.
It was hilarious. Yeah. I was just like, I was super nervous like when everybody showed up because like basically my wife planned the whole thing. I didn't know anything about like where we were going or who was going to be there or anything like that. I just started like seeing random people from past lives show up. You know, it was just like, oh, they're like this person I grew up with, but I haven't talked to them in like 12 years. And like this person is like a podcasting friend that I met like 2 years ago, and we've hung out a few times at like events and stuff, but that's about it. And then it was just kind of this weird eclectic mixture of people, but it ended up being awesome. Everybody was super cool and we all had a really good time. So I appreciate
one of the best dance parties of my life.
Honestly, it was great. Yeah, it was great. And I'm not even a dancer, which shows you how cool it was because it just kind of happened organically. You know what I mean? Yeah, it was just humid as hell in Mexico, like in August. But
outside.
Yeah. We all just like all the guys within like 15 minutes were just all had to take our shirts off because we were sweating so profusely. It was insane. It had to be insanely dehydrated going to bed that night if you add the drinking into it. I know you were sober at the time, not drinking at the time. So you were just going on the energy of the party. So
well, and what was so great about it is because it was so humid and we were all so gross that we all just kind of dropped any facades that we had, even though we didn't know each other very well. Like we were disgusting. So we just went wild and it was so much fun. That was good time. Honestly, the best dance party of my life. So yeah, we've bonded for sure.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Jen. I'm a big fan of this type of revenue model. So talk to me about like softball question here to start things off. How do you currently make money and what were you doing before this to make money?
So Congressional Dish, it's funny because you said that I make money in a couple different ways. I do have to correct you because I've never had a sponsor and I've made the commitment that I will never have a sponsor because my show examines government. And in the process of doing that, I am looking at investigations into companies. I'm looking into money that's been collected by members of Congress. And I just feel like having freedom to tell people what I think they need to hear and not having any sponsor have the ability to be like, oh, we don't like that you said that. Like there's a level of trust that my audience has with me because they know that no one has been allowed to pay me to say anything. So even if I believed in the product, just the act of saying, I'm getting paid to tell you this, I've never done that. So I think that it's built some trust. And so instead of accepting sponsors, what I've done is, and I've ripped this name off from Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak, but I call it the value for value model. And so essentially I create episodes that I think have intrinsic value because I make a very big distinction that my show is not about politics, which I think is more like campaigns, he said, she said type of stuff. My show is about government. And so I'm doing stuff that nobody wants to do. I'm watching very long, boring hearings and taking out all of the fluff and taking out all the politics, quite frankly, and giving you the expert testimony. Sometimes these will be investigations that have been going on for years, and I'm summarizing them in an hour or two for you. I'm also reading laws and telling you what's in them and how they're going to affect your life. And because that work has value, I've set up a system where I say, okay, I'm going to give you this valuable episode up front for free, and you pay me whatever you think is fair. And so over the course of the last 12 years, I've built up quite a nice living with a very dedicated audience. I've had people that have been paying me nonstop for the full 12 years.
Wow.
And yeah, so I'm really proud of the community that we've built. And it really is about a value exchange between me and my audience.
Yeah, that's what happens when you focus on product. Mm-hmm. Essentially, like there's a couple of different ways to look at content, right? Is like a lot of people, and in the world that I come from in like the business space, people use content as like a lead gen for the business. It's kind of like, it's one of the pillars of their marketing strategy is organic content. And then the content leads people to trust them more. And then they eventually buy something and they become a customer and all this other thing. With your scenario, what you just laid out, the content is not a lead into anything. The content is the product.
Correct.
And due to the very nature that it is content, it also tends to also be the lead gen, which is cool. But it kind of it mirrors the Silicon Valley people, like the product-led growth idea is kind of the same thing with content that's specifically made for the value of the content itself, where the product is just more of the content, which I think is a really, really cool model because it kind of breaks traditional ideas of what it looks like to have that. And yeah, I know before we hit record, you mentioned that it was, a couple $100,000 and half of it was Patreon. So I was like, yeah, I just assumed it would be sponsorships. So that's really cool that you've been able to kind of draw that line in the sand and say that this is something that we're not going to do just based on the topic of conversation that we do. I also really like that it's not just another political commentary talk show, which I'm sure you've been tempted to do a bunch of times because that content performs so much better on social when you're out there throwing polarizing opinions all the time. And you would actually be somebody that's qualified to do that. Like there's so many people that do it that have zero qualifications to do it, who don't do like 1/100th of the research that you do. So good on you for like saying, this is my mission, this is what we're doing, and regardless of what other opportunities might exist out there, I'm going to stick to this.
Well, to be fair, I do also do that, but I just don't do it on Congressional Dish. Right. So about 2 years ago, we started another show called We're Not Wrong, where my friend Justin Robert Young, his show is politics. Okay. And so as friends, I was kind of disrespecting everything he does. Just saying like, you're covering the stuff as if it's sports. And so our conversations we always found were funny. And when he had me as a guest on his show, it always went really well. And so for years, he badgered me and Andrew Heaton, who's kind of a libertarian leaning. His show is The Political Orphanage. And so the three of us together, he saw that there was something magic. And so we started that show as commentary a few years ago. So it kind of gets that out of my system, which I actually think helps Congressional Dish be better because I can get my opinions out over there. And even though my obviously it's my podcast, so Congressional Dish, like it happens, but I do think separating it out to be like, this is Congressional Dish is where I give you all the sources, where everything is researched. And I'm very careful with my words, where on We're Not Wrong, I am very not careful with my words. But there is a difference, right?
Absolutely.
And I think the money really is right now in that political sphere. And I think it's hurting the country.
I agree.
Honestly.
I agree.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's like, because it's not done the way that you guys do it. It's usually not done with this kind of levity and fun and like, hey, we're all friends who happen to have differing opinions, but we're going to share our differing opinions. And the conversation might get heated sometimes, but at the end of the day, we're still going to share a beer at the end of it. And we're still going to be friends because of it. And there's way less of that going on, way more of this, like just gross identity politics that ends in this, like, we're right and we're justified and you're wrong and you're not justified. And then there's just no give on either side and just ends up being a bunch of people yelling at each other the whole time. And they're talking over each other, which I think is why mainstream media has been suffering such a huge hit.
I agree.
It's like you get these 20-minute segments, that are split up into like 3 minutes at a time for commercial breaks. And then the whole thing is basically just four people on a split screen on TV talking over each other and hurling insults at each other. And it's like it's become this like mixture of like reality TV and daytime soap opera television moved into with the disguise of media somehow, rather than like actually just telling you what's going on and letting you formulate your own opinion or belief about it.
Yeah, and I actually think that it's been really hard for me to get people to try an episode of Congressional Dish because of that, because you hear the title, anything related to politics, and they just assume I've picked a side. I'm going to yell at you. I'm going to be mean. It's not going to be information. It's going to be opinion. Like, I think because that is so standard now, to the point that even the television news stations aren't really doing news. They're doing opinion and guessing the future. That's actually been really hard for me when it comes to making money with this particular podcast, because once people try it, they're in and they stay for 12 years. But yeah, I think we're all really sick of that and we're not seeking it out. And so that's when I think about like what's been the hardest thing for me when it comes to making more money, it's how to get more people to try what looks like a political podcast, but isn't. It's just, It's so different. People aren't expecting what I'm giving them.
So what were you doing before this, Jen?
A lot of jobs just for cash. So I graduated with a degree in communications from Loyola Marymount University. And I had studied abroad in Germany in 2003. And so that's when we started the Iraq War, and that completely changed my life. And so I came back obsessed with figuring out what are we doing? Because that's what everyone in Europe was asking me, like, what is going on here? And I didn't know. I was embarrassed. And so I knew I wanted to have a job that would let me go down these rabbit holes. Like, I wanted to learn, but I didn't know what that path would look like. It's like, do I aim for the New York Times, which lied us into the war? Do I aim for, the television, which just seems, I mean, even back then you could just tell that they weren't really doing news. And so I spent a lot of years career-wise just lost and decided I'm just going to pay my bills. And so I was a corporate landlord for a while. I had 444 apartments on the LAX runway that I was managing. I sent people up to timeshare presentations in Waikiki. That was a crazy job. I was a waitress on and off for 13 years. I was just doing all the things I needed to do to pay my bills while I was still researching and learning. Like, I was just constantly like reading books about what the Bush administration had done. And then in the Obama years, I started paying more attention to Congress. So it was like, I was kind of waiting for the technology to catch up with the idea that I had. But I knew, just like goal wise, and this isn't even like a career goal. It's like, what do I want out of the career? I knew I wanted essentially freedom. I wanted the freedom to set my schedule, and I wanted location freedom. And so once podcasting became technologically possible for me, as someone who's not, I don't enjoy tech, but in 2012, I figured out that like podcasting could work. And so I'm one of the people that had the thing to say, and podcasting just became the medium. It wasn't like, oh, I want a podcast and then I'm going to find the topic. It was the other way around for me.
Yeah.
And so, it's for nothing I did before podcasting work wise would have led you to believe that this is where I would be in 2025.
Yeah. Well, I just love the idea of seasons in life. And if you're not where you are right now, it's okay. Don't freak out. There's probably going to be a time later in life, even if you get where you want to go, where you kind of romanticize the days that you have now. So be where you are, be present where you are, and then start thinking about what that future looks like. And then, to your credit, you didn't really know exactly what it was going to turn into. You had no idea exactly what the medium was going to be, how it was going to generate money. You just kind of had this thing that you were interested in, and you pursued that thing in your free time by just reading books, consuming information, and educating yourself, getting like learning more about the topic. And then when they're kind of an opportunity kind of presented itself, and like, oh, this podcasting thing seems kind of interesting, you were able to actually take advantage of it. So this was like 2013 that you started?
It was 2012 when I got the idea. I had been working at Weight Watchers, But my dad had a really nasty heart attack. And in the process of bringing him back with the defibrillator, they shattered both of his shoulders with the electricity. It was gnarly. And so
Gosh.
he spent more than 3 weeks in UCLA Medical Center. And then obviously his recovery was nasty. And so I left my job at Weight Watchers and just kind of moved in with my dad for 6 weeks just to be there to help, to do whatever. And so after that, dad and I had the heart to heart where he was like, you are just doing these jobs that aren't leading anywhere. Like, what do you want to do? And that's where I told him, like, I have this crazy idea for a podcast. And so, of course, in 2012, the question was, what's a podcast? Yeah. So I explained it to him, and he's an accountant. And so his next question is, well, like, how are you going to make money doing that? And I'm like, I don't know yet,
That's a
but
good
I
question.
think I will. I'll just figure it out, because my entire theory with money is like, I've learned how to make it. So I will figure that part out, but it's the art of the podcast. And I want to see, is this something I'd like to do? Is there an audience for this? It was like, I wanted to try it first. And so where I had this month where I knew I wasn't working, and I had this conversation with my dad, because he was like, go for it. Because at least if you try, you can say that you've tried, and then you can go back to, figuring it out. And so with this time, I downloaded pretty much all the episodes that Daniel J. Lewis had produced of his podcast, The Audacity to Podcast. He teaches people how to podcast. And so I took notes, paper and pencil, just like I did in college. And a month later, I launched it using the information that he gave. And so it's funny, the first podcasting convention I ever went to, there were legit celebrities there, but I didn't know who they were. I knew who Daniel J. Lewis was. And so when I saw him, I fangirled out so hard on him that I scared him. We're friends now, but I scared him that day. It's kind of like a legendary story now in podcasting. But yeah, I had the idea. And
do you remember how much it cost you to get started?
$60, I believe.
Thank you.
Yeah. Because I went on Amazon. There was this gnarly little podcasting kit. It was so bad that the microphone stand didn't actually hold up the microphone. Like, the microphone was too heavy. So while I was recording, it would slowly bend over. And so I would kind of bend to the left in order to stay with my microphone. It was such trash. And then I got hosting with Libsyn for, I think, $20 a month. And I had just some trashy WordPress blog that I used for years. So yeah, I think the microphone was $40 ish, and then it was $20 for the hosting. That's all I needed.
And that's all you still need. What's one of my favorite things about the podcast space in general is, if you start on audio and you don't worry about video at first, you can kind of get some of the kinks out of the show, and it is significantly less cost to start and significantly less time to produce if you're not going to pay a producer. But even if you do pay a producer, it's significantly less cost to pay the producer if you don't have to worry about video as well. So, and this was at a time where that was really popular. Like, when I started my show, I didn't do video on any of the interviews for like 2 years. It was basically all Skype audio back in the day. And you could just run on audio. I had a $60 mic, the USB mic that I just plugged in my computer. And like, my first studio setup was like an upside down laundry hamper with my laptop on top of it in my closet with a $60 microphone plugged into the computer, and just like recording out of the closet. So yeah, it does not take significant cost like people would lead you to believe. Like, you don't need to go, drop 10 grand in equipment and studio setups and lighting and video and all these other things to just get started doing the show. Because the bottom line is 90% of podcasters don't make it past episode 10. Yeah. So there's clearly a lot of people who think they'll enjoy it and then do it and then don't like it enough to keep doing it. So maybe do it for as cheap as you possibly can to start working out the kinks before you decide that you're going to keep moving forward. And then you can always reinvest into the show as it continues to grow. How long did it take you to make your first dollar?
A year. Because for the first year, I didn't try to make any money. So this is where I will acknowledge my privilege. But at the time, so my husband and I, we've been together for over 20 years. And so when he graduated from college, he was accepted into a program he got a master's in engineering. And so I worked while he got his master's. And so in 2012, when I had this idea, and I had been working all these weird jobs for so long. And so he said, how about you take a year and really go for this and see if it works and just take the financial pressure off of it. I will float us for this year and then we'll
Nice.
figure it out at the year mark. So at the year mark, I put up a PayPal and started asking for donations. And I had about $50 coming in when 2 months later, my husband lost his job.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Well, first off, tell me about that first dollar that you saw come through.
It was really exciting. It was someone that had set up a $5 a month recurring PayPal subscription. So not only was it $5, but it was $5 saying, I'm going to continue to support you going into the future.
Yeah.
And so that's why when Joe lost his job, even though obviously we're not going to live off of $50 a month, the few people that at that time were willing to not only support me, but had said, I will support you going forward, gave us the faith that we needed to make the leap to keep the show going.
Yeah.
Even during like there was a year where he didn't have an income and like we hustled. So yeah, those initial few dollars were more impactful than I think anyone could have ever imagined. Because if they hadn't done that, 2 months later, I probably would have quit.
It's the belief.
Mm-hmm.
It changes your belief paradigm to go from this is impossible to this is possible. Like somebody actually reached into their pocket and paid me money to like do this thing that I enjoy. It's like that unlock is crazy because then you're just like, wait a second. If I thought it was impossible to make $50 a month, I currently think it's impossible to make 500 or 5,000 or 10,000, but I didn't think it was possible to make 50. So, what else is possible? So the following year to go from like the high of like, hey, I'm making money on this, if I keep doing it, it might actually turn into significant income for us. You keep working, I'll keep doing this. And then all of a sudden, no job. What did you guys do during that year?
So we decided a penny saved is a penny earned. And so we were living in Boston at the time, and our landlord was amazing. And so he let us out of our lease with no penalties or anything. And we moved across the country because my husband's a solar power engineer. And at the time, he got laid off because the state tax credits had disappeared. So we're like, okay, we're going to follow the sun to the west.
Yeah.
We went to his parents' retirement house about 45 minutes outside of Bend, Oregon. And it was on a golf course. It was gorgeous property. So we basically took care of the house where we could live rent free. Joe worked on the golf course. I worked at a restaurant that was on the property. And so I was working 2 full-time jobs. It was a lot, but yeah, we just kind of wrote it out on the golf course.
2 full-time jobs as in like running the show and doing. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I ran the show and then I was doing at least 5 to 6 shifts at the restaurant every week. And it was fine because I had no social life. I didn't know anyone in the middle of the mountains. So it was my social, like the restaurant felt like my social life. And then the podcast was the job. And then Joe, my husband, had to help with the show a little bit and he hated every second of it. He can't stand the irrationality that he hears in congressional testimony. Yeah. So he was very eager to get a job that saved him from the congressional record. And so he eventually got his solar engineering job and he's still an engineer now. But yeah, that was crazy.
And was that in Oregon as well?
No, so he got a job in San Francisco. And so that was wild too, that we had to move into the most expensive at the time housing market in the United States. Yeah. So even with the salary that he got, it wasn't enough. And so we got a small apartment in downtown Oakland and I was cutting coupons and I was buying our groceries at the grocery outlet. And we were pinching pennies. Like my income didn't really make a difference for us for 5 full years.
Yeah.
It took a while.
Yeah. What made you continue during that time? Like 5 years to do anything is a long time. 5 years to do something where it doesn't really make you much money or make a dent in your finances and requiring as much work as it required from you. I mean, this is why most people quit. So why didn't you?
Well, I mean, there was steady growth the whole time. It was slow, steady growth. And I also had Rob Walsh, the VP of Libsyn, kind of in my head because at all the podcasting conferences, he tells us like, it's not going to be a spike. Like when you hear those stories, those aren't the rule. Those are the exception.
Correct.
And so for me, I was getting the small, steady growth. And so every month that it was like $100 more, $200 more, like that was absolutely giving me the faith to keep going, just like it did from that first dollar. But also I was getting what I was looking for. I was able to sleep in as long as I wanted to. I was location independent so that when all of this happened, I could move to Oregon and keep this job. I could move to San Francisco and keep this job. So we could follow Joe's job. And so the freedom I was looking for, I was getting. And then also, I'm really proud of the work. I
Hmm.
do feel like I'm spending, if I'm going to spend 40, 50 hours a week on something, I want it to be doing some kind of good in the world. And so even though my audience is small, I'm serving my audience well. I know that I've saved them thousands of dollars by telling them about tax credits they didn't know existed. Like
Yeah.
there's all kinds of things that I've provided for them, and it's I feel good about it. I feel good about it in a way that I didn't as a corporate landlord, where I was evicting good people because the stock price of some evil corporation. Like, I didn't feel good about that.
Yeah.
I feel good every time I press publish on a Congressional Dish episode. So I had the faith that this day would come
Yeah.
where I would have enough and I would be comfortable. And now Joe and I are digital nomads. So we live wherever we want all over the world. So it's like that was what success looked like to me. And so
Yeah.
even though the numbers weren't impressive, in a way, I was already successful back then because the
Correct.
freedom I was looking for, I already had.
Yeah, that's what's great about having that North Star. It's like if you have the North Star clarity of like still to the like, if you can envision what that future version looks like and still feel like that would be awesome, then why not continue working on it?
Mm-hmm.
Like the time is going to pass regardless. Like 2025 is here. In 2015, it seems like it's never going to come, but it has, and it's here, and like the same thing about 2035 and 2045. So it's like, what are you doing right now to set yourself up and to put yourself in a position that you can wake up every single day and actually feel those feelings of reality, not those feelings of the dreams that you have. And then are you willing to put in the work to get there? And so that unlock of actually being excited to work, that's the unlock. And I
Mm-hmm.
watch people like you, even like Erica Mandy with the Newsworthy,
Yes.
who does these, 15, 20-minute daily episodes on what happened yesterday in the news. Like that's crazy to me that she does, like that she's been able to stay consistent with that show. But it's again just something where you can see clearly that it's tied to what she believes to be her purpose.
Yeah.
And the same thing with you. And that piece of it to me is the unlock. Is like, are you willing to work on this for free? Because if you're willing to work on this for free, getting paid anything is going to be awesome. But getting
Mm-hmm.
paid full time and then getting paid better than any corporate job was going to pay you to do this thing full time, I mean, that's the dream. And now you are actually living that on a daily basis. But it took 12 years. And that's what I want people to really take away from this is like, you got to start thinking in terms of decades when it comes to living your dream life, not in terms of months. It, like you said, it's the exception. It's not the rule. Like the Bobby Altoffs with the really good podcast who blew up on her second episode and is in Variety and at Hollywood parties. Like that doesn't happen. The Haktua girl with her show, like that stuff doesn't happen. They're one-offs for a reason. And more often than not, it's going to be the exact opposite. It's going to take a decade for you to really build something that you're super, super proud of. So congrats to you on all the success that you've seen there. What's changed in your personal finances since then? You guys have always seemingly been willing to sacrifice in the short term to be able to live the life that you want in the long term. How do you guys look at managing personal finances now? Do you take kind of like a percentage for like, do you have a certain like philosophy when it comes to, we need this much in savings, we need this much going into a 401k, we need this much going into travel or experiences, or do you have like a system or a thought process behind that?
Well, we've been financially secure only since 2017. So, it's nice to know that we have a cushion. Basically, as digital nomads, we've decided that we're going to have a lot of freedom with our housing budget because we're both of us are remote workers. We have to really like where we live.
Hmm.
And so we'll spend more than I think most people would on our housing. But in other ways, like I don't buy fancy clothes. We don't have a fancy car. We don't go to fancy restaurants, mainly because we have a anxious dog. So she needs to come with us everywhere. So if there's no patio, we're not going. So we live very, frugal lives. But one thing that we're working on right now, because in our 30s, we were working so hard on building these careers because, Joe went from being unemployed to now he runs the central division of a utility scale solar company. He's done very well for himself, but like we had no work-life balance and we had no retirement. And so now our focus has changed on, we're working on sustainability with our work flows. So we are looking for work-life balance. We are taking time off and kind of adjusting, like, instead of hustling all the time, can we not worry so much about money so that we have more time than money? So that's been more of a priority. And then pretty much all the extra money we have right now, we're putting in to investments. So where most people tell you like take 20%, put in investments, we did 45 last year. Great. To kind of make up for that lost time. And I don't know that we'll have to continue doing that too much longer, but right now we're just plowing money into retirement because we really didn't save it all. And actually, I don't regret that at all, because even if I had been taking 10% of the nothing I was making 10 years ago, doing 45% now, I think we've caught up and then some doing it this way.
Well, it speaks to like, I might get in trouble for saying this, but my belief is like, if you do not have the ability to out earn your expenses, your extra income should be investments into yourself and your ability to go earn more income.
Absolutely.
Because, that $30 a month that you're going to invest into something rather than like whatever, buying a course to learn how to, I don't know, run Google ads, something like that. It's like, if I buy this course for $1,000 to run Google ads, can that help me make more income this year? Answer is yes. And to a significant degree, whereas like that $1,000 invested in the market might be worth, 30 grand in 40 years. It's like, but that $1,000 invested into yourself to learn a skill set that helps you to be able to bring more clients into your agency or start an agency or something like that, that can make you 30 grand next month. That can make you 30 grand by the end of the year or within 2 years. The return on your investment when you're putting the money into yourself and following it up with action is significantly better than any return on any investment that you're going to get. And then once you've increased earning power and then maintained frugality, now there's a massive delta between what you're making and what you're spending every month. And that can just be plowed, like that extra can just be plowed into aggressively attacking retirement. So obviously this is going to be different advice for everybody depending on what stage of life that you're in. But overall, I really like that strategy. Jen, I want to move the conversation a little bit to some government things. We won't touch on politics too much, but we're in a unique time when it comes to money. It seems, for the first time ever, a 30-year-old person is worse off economically than their parents were when their parents were 30. First time ever that's happened in the US economy. What do you think is happening on kind of a macroeconomic scale when it comes to government policy that's causing some of these things? And what are some of like the narratives that are being pushed by media that you just found to just not be true?
So I didn't go looking for this when I started studying Congress this way, but what I have found is that our Congress is representing corporations and rich people. They're really not representing us. So it was interesting I went to both conventions this year as a journalist, and the rhetoric, they talk a big game about working for us workers, but in practice they don't. And I've read so many budgets and so many bills that actually appropriate the money that I see where it's going. And so when I look at the actions they're taking, and then I look at just the way the economy is structured, we also have an economy that benefits, and this is tax ways, it's all the ways. It benefits investors and it doesn't really benefit workers. Like if you have an economy that is benefiting investors, workers, people that are working for a paycheck, they're a line item that they want to keep as low as possible. They're like, I know it's a human being behind the wages, but on a ledger, you're an expense. And so I think where workers in the United States are being seen as expenses as opposed to human beings with intrinsic value whose work has value, I think it kind of explains what's happening here. Because I know that when my grandparents were younger and they were working, like there was an expectation that your company owed you something if you were going to be working all day long to make that company function. We've lost that in this country. And what's concerning to me right now is I am seeing right now, it's not getting any better. In fact, it's getting far worse. So as long as we are electing politicians that are working for our bosses and rigging the tax code so that an investment is not taxed and work is. I think that's how we've ended up here. It's yeah, and I wish I could say I see it getting better, but right now I think we're headed in the wrong direction.
Talk to me about the Department of Government Efficiency. I know we posted something about that the other day and you replied to it. And I wanted to ask you about it when we're on here because I think there's a couple misconceptions about it being that it's not an actual department, that it's not saving money. Can you kind of explain what's going on behind the scenes with DOGE?
Sure. This is super weird. So I do want to say the date because this could change. It's February 27th, 2025. As of today, the Department of Government Efficiency is not a real department. A department, so the way the government is structured, you have the department in the executive branch. And underneath that are a bunch of different agencies. So, for example, the Department of Homeland Security is an umbrella of 22 different agencies. A department needs to be created by Congress. So the Department of Homeland Security was created during the George W. Bush administration, but it was Congress that did it. And then every year that department is funded by Congress and then its activities are authorized. None of that has happened with DOGE. So the way that it was created was via an executive order by taking an agency. So again, an agency is a sub part of a department. It took an agency called the Digital Services Agency, which existed to basically do like tech work. It was created when the Obamacare exchanges were a mess. And so we hired a bunch of people to make them not a mess. That's what that is. It's not a very important agency. Donald Trump essentially renamed that DOGE. And so when I look at everything that's happening, I call it a fake department because it's not real. Like it's wild that this is happening. And so what we think might be happening, because there's no transparency here, we think these DOGE people might be giving orders to the people who are in charge of the agencies right now, who are then executing what Elon tells them to do. But if it is coming directly from Elon, this is not authorized or funded by Congress, so it all might be illegitimate. It's really wild what's happening right now. And so there's lawsuits, but lawsuits take a minute through the courts.
Yeah.
And so that's why, like, just the other day, there was a bunch of layoffs that happened, but a judge stepped in and said none of these are legal. And so we think there might be a mass rehiring because none of those were legal. So right now we're just seeing unprecedented attempts to it looks to me like break our government because they're doing things in ways that have never been done, have never been allowed. So yeah, DOGE is a fascinating thing in that I hesitate to even call it real at this point.
Yeah, so there's no actual intrinsic governmental authority behind the department as it exists. No. Is there legislation that's being proposed to turn it into that?
So there are thousands of bills that get introduced in every Congress. And so just because something gets introduced, it doesn't mean it's an actual thing that's happening. So there might be something that's been introduced, but because there's so many, like they're not on my radar. Is anything moving? Has anything moved through the House or the Senate? No. Congress isn't doing anything about it either. It's no.
Oh, that's so wild. I obviously would like to see it. I personally, and we might disagree on this, but I personally like the idea of it. I like the idea of examining where all this money is going because it just seems like there's just so much egregious waste at a governmental level with the money that they're just gross mismanagement of funds. And I like the idea of having more like lean startup entrepreneurial type values injected into government resources. But yeah, obviously it's got to be legit and there's got to be checks and balances within that system as well. Like there should be no single point of authority when it comes to any of these things, even if you like the guy, you know what I mean? Like I personally am a fan of Elon. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of Elon, but I still don't want to see a single person have ultimate control with no checks or balances or any, barrier between them and taking an action. Like it's still a government at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. It's still not a business and should be treated differently. But it just seems strange that this is in the cultural zeitgeist so heavily without it actually being a recognized authority from the government.
Well, and this is why I don't even trust the idea that this is about waste, fraud, and abuse, which at this point is just a talking point, because if you really want to know where the waste is, all you have to do is look up Inspectors General's report, because it's their job to look at the executive agencies and basically call them out on all of the bad stuff they've done. And over the last 12 years, like when I see a hearing and there's an inspector general that's testifying, it's always on my list. And that's where you hear all of this stuff. So we have, oh my God, thousands of pages that are just low hanging fruit. Like, here you go, look at this. That's not what's happening here. The Trump administration fired 17 inspectors general immediately. And then this is just blanket firings, which is, I mean, the proof is in the fact that they were firing people that they immediately had to hire back because they had critical jobs. So they're not being careful. They're not using all the work that we've already paid for to identify the problems in our government. Like if you want to know about waste, contractors for the Pentagon, like half of the money we spend on defense in the United States goes to private contractors, and they have been price gouging us for years. It's all documented, and they're not doing anything about that.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you what the motivations are, but it's not to find the waste that's already been identified and do something about it. That much I know for sure.
Interesting stuff. Jen, I appreciate you coming on the show. Let's move into the last segment here, the random round, just quick random questions, quick random answers. I'll get you out of here.
Okay, sounds great.
All right. What profession other than your own do you think that it would have been fun to master?
Meteorologist.
If you could sit on a park bench with somebody, past or present, and chat for an hour, who would it be?
George Carlin.
Flex and fail, Jen. Tell me a purchase you've made that you're happy about and one that you regret making.
So I'm really happy with my car purchase. I'm not a car person. And so the only car I've ever purchased is a Honda Clarity. And the reason I love it is that we have 50 miles of electric, and then we also have a fossil fuel backup. So we can take road trips, but when we're just bopping around Austin, it's all on electric. I absolutely love my car. And then a purchase I regret. I mean, I don't own a lot. So I don't think I have it. Like I can fit everything I need in a walk-in closet. So yeah, I don't own anything I regret. I don't think.
Perfect.
That's right now on my Goodwill pile, I have a costume. It's a turkey. It's a 6-foot tall turkey costume that I just don't need. And it was more expensive than it needed to be. So yeah, the turkey.
There you go. Turkey costume. We'll take it. How do you like to consume information best? Books, audiobooks, blogs, podcasts, YouTube videos, newsletters?
I like the efficiency of audiobooks, but if I'm really trying to learn, if that's the question, I'm very visual. And so I kind of like to listen to stuff and to take notes with a pen and paper. That's the best way that I learn.
What's a good book or resource that you've gone through about making money, investing money, something money related?
I don't know that I've ever read an investing book, to be honest.
Really?
I listen to a lot of podcasts about it.
Yeah.
But book wise, like usually if I'm reading a book, it's something about the state of the world.
Something more existential in nature. Yeah.
Yeah. Like right now I'm reading one about like, the debt economy. So I don't know that I've ever read one.
Okay, cool. What is your go-to pump up song?
Oh, Head Like a Hole by 9 Inch Nails.
What is something that you're not very good at?
Marketing my show. So thank you for having me on.
Of course. As we get everything wrapped up here, Jen, this is your opportunity to market that show. Where can people go find more stuff from you?
Well, the show is called Congressional Dish. It's found everywhere that you find audio podcasts. We actually don't do video for this one, but you can listen to it on YouTube. And you can support the show on Patreon. And Patreon is where I'm also doing Last Week in Congress. And so that's the series that I do every week, letting you know what's in the congressional record. So it's like bills that are moving, hearings that happened, all that stuff is on Patreon. But congressionaldish.com is where you have the links to all this. And it's also where I provide every source for everything I say on every public episode of Congressional Dish.
Love it. If you are a fan of podcasting and you want to get some some insights on the inner workings of our Congress from somebody who genuinely cares about this stuff and puts in hours and hours and hours of research into every single episode that she produces. I cannot recommend Congressional Dish more. So whatever app you're listening to this on, just go search Congressional Dish, check out the show there, or go to congressionaldish.com to see more from Jen and what she's got going on. Jen, thanks so much for doing this. Always a pleasure to hang out with you, see you, talk to you again. For everybody else listening, tuning in, remember that money will only solve your money problems, but it's a little bit easier to solve the other problems in your life with a little bit of money in the bank. So let's solve that problem first here on the Travis Makes Money podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time. Peace out.